One entitled demand, one fatal miscalculation. That's all it took to transform everyday Karen antics into the 5 most horrific deaths imaginable. Each story is a chilling reminder that when arrogance collides with reality, the fallout can be deadly. Because in the end, toxic entitlement doesn't care about your status, your followers, or your fancy job title. It only leaves behind chaos, consequences, and a tragic ending no one saw coming. It was March 15, 2017, when Vanessa Clay's endless hunger for control finally caught up with her in a way no one could have imagined. At 42, she wasn't just another pharmaceutical sales manager from Columbus, Ohio. She was a storm in human form, moving from place to place, leaving a trail of shaken employees and bitter encounters. Vanessa had built her entire existence around belittling others, carrying herself like she owned every space she walked into. With her meticulously styled blonde hair and that infamous Hermes scarf draped around her neck, she radiated the kind of smug superiority that made people's stomachs knot before she even opened her mouth. That day was no different. By noon, she had already humiliated a teenage Starbucks barista until tears rolled down her cheeks, forced a McDonald's worker into disciplinary trouble, and unleashed hell on a Target cashier who refused to honor her expired coupon. Each meltdown was streamed live to her 5,000 followers, cheering her on like she was some gladiator in an arena, not realizing they were pushing her closer to the edge. When she walked into Westfield Shopping Center, her sights locked on the jewelry store. She wanted a $300 refund without a receipt, and when the clerk calmly explained the rules, Vanessa did what Vanessa always did. She detonated. The scarf was adjusted with flair, her voice raised just enough to echo across the showroom, and her phone angled perfectly to capture the chaos. But this time, the clerk had had enough. Security was called. Marcus Williams, 28 years old, father of 2, had seen angry customers before, but nothing like the hurricane that was Vanessa. As he stood waiting at the base of the escalator, she spotted him and immediately turned her rage his way. Streaming live, she leaned over the railing, screaming about incompetence and promising to get everyone fired. Bags swung in one hand, her phone clutched in the other, that scarf fluttering as she gestured wildly. And then it happened. In her frenzy, she didn't notice the silk slipping too close to the escalator's side panel. With terrifying precision, the machine snagged the scarf and began to tighten it around her throat. At first, she thought she could tug it free, but within seconds, the fabric had become a deadly noose. Security footage later showed her clawing at her neck, the same hands that moments earlier had been pointing accusingly at Marcus, now desperately fighting for air. People screamed. Shoppers rushed forward, searching frantically for the emergency stop button. 45 seconds stretched into an eternity. The machinery didn't care who she was, didn't care about her followers, didn't care about her entitlement, it just kept pulling. Her face turned pale, her body buckled. By the time paramedics arrived 8 minutes later, Vanessa Clay was gone. The scarf that symbolized her superiority had betrayed her in front of the very audience she lived to impress. But the world didn't mourn. Her final live stream spread like wildfire, capturing her last tirade as it spiraled into tragedy. Instead of sympathy, the comments were merciless. Play Karen games, win Karen prizes. Her family tried to fight back with lawsuits, demanding someone be held accountable, but the cold reality of the footage left no doubt. Vanessa's own entitlement had scripted her ending. Westfield added safety warnings and emergency stops after the incident, but none of that erased the memory of what happened on that escalator. It was August 3rd, 2018, when Gillian Frost's carefully crafted life of dominance and entitlement came crashing down in a way no one could have scripted. At just 38 years old, standing 5'4" in designer heels and carrying herself with the swagger of her corporate title, Gillian had built her reputation not on kindness or respect, but on control. She was the kind of HR director who turned power into a weapon, the kind who made employees' stomachs knot with a single email. Her white BMW SUV gleamed like a status symbol, and she used it as one more tool to intimidate anyone she deemed beneath her. Even her business cards weren't introductions. They were reminders of her superiority. That Tuesday had already gone terribly wrong for her. A promotion she believed was hers by birthright had been denied, and in her mind, it was an unforgivable insult. She set out on a revenge tour, a shopping spree that wasn't about comfort, but about reclaiming control. She berated a gas station attendant over the speed of the pump, demanded a Subway manager fire a sandwich maker over a crooked lettuce leaf, and filmed herself mocking low-wage employees for her Instagram followers. The comments poured in, feeding her rage, convincing her she was a queen holding court. By the time she rolled into the Target parking garage, Jillian was a storm searching for its next victim. For 20 minutes, she sat behind the wheel, honking with violent persistence at families and elderly shoppers who dared to move at a human pace. Her phone recorded every honk, every insult, every sneer. Content for her series she proudly titled Teaching Parking Lot Etiquette to Peasants, and then she saw them. The Martinez family. Parents, children, and a grandmother, Maria, 78 years old, moving slowly with her walker, trying to help load groceries into the trunk. For Jillian, this was the ultimate offense. Important people like her had places to be, jobs to do. She rolled up behind them and laid into her horn, screaming out the window about how their slowness was ruining her day. But rage wasn't enough. She needed to humiliate. She threw open the BMW's door and stormed toward them, phone in hand, her voice rising in pitch and venom as she promised to call police, to have them arrested for obstructing traffic. She stepped backward onto the low concrete barrier that lined the garage, seeking higher ground, literally trying to tower over them. She wanted to look down at Maria and the others as she filmed, as though her height could make her words cut deeper. But arrogance has its limits. The concrete beneath her, weakened by months of ignored construction issues, wasn't built to endure her fury. Jillian gestured wildly, pointing, waving, stamping her heels in indignation, her 135-pound frame shaking loose a crack that gave way in an instant. And just like that, she was gone. The Martinez family gasped as Jillian's body plunged 35 feet into the open air. Her phone captured her own final moments. The sudden shift of the camera, her scream, and the sickening silence before impact. She struck the asphalt head first. The crack of bone echoed in the garage. Her skull fractured, her spine severed at the C2 vertebrae. Brain matter scattered onto the pavement, her body twitching once before going still in a widening pool of blood. Her designer heels clattered to the ground, one landing feet from Maria's walker. In shock, Maria, who seconds earlier had been the target of Jillian's venom, pulled her phone from her purse and dialed 911 with trembling hands. Her voice broke as she tried to explain what happened. Even as her mind reeled from the sight of death she could never unsee. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but there was nothing left to save. Jillian Frost was gone, still gripping her phone in death. The last video frozen on screen, showing her rage-filled face seconds before the fall. The same phone that once gave her a platform to mock others now told the story of her own undoing. The garage closed that night, inspectors swarming the site. Reports revealed multiple safety violations and a crumbling infrastructure. But the blame didn't rest solely there. Investigators concluded that Jillian's reckless behavior had played its part, her arrogance pushing her over the literal edge. Target faced fines, millions in OSHA penalties, though reduced after Jillian's role was undeniable. The internet's response was swift and merciless. Her video spread within hours, memes and comments flooding every platform. She literally died mad about a parking space. Corporate Karen meets concrete reality. The mockery was endless, but beneath it all was something darker. A fascination with the irony of a woman who lived to assert dominance, destroyed by her need to do it one more time. It was March 15, 2012, in Riverside, California, and the evening air inside Westfield Shopping Center was thick with tension. Shoppers who had only come for errands found themselves unwilling witnesses to Linda Morrison's performance. At 52 years old, Linda carried herself like she owned every space she walked into. That night, her target was a teenage cashier, barely old enough to defend himself, who had the misfortune of refusing a $12 return. For 45 excruciating minutes, Linda unleashed every ounce of her entitlement. Her words were sharp, her tone relentless, echoing through the aisles as she threatened lawsuits, corporate complaints, and reputational ruin over a trivial policy. Customers waiting nearby exchanged uneasy glances, but Linda thrived in their discomfort, her voice rising with every self-righteous proclamation about the death of customer service. To Linda, this wasn't unusual. It was ritual. She lived to press buttons, to make service workers squirm beneath the weight of her demands. Her own career as a department store manager had taught her all the tricks: what to say, how to push, how to dominate. That night, she wore her power like armor, leaving behind a trail of humiliated staff and bitter silence as she stormed toward the exit, arms weighed down with shopping bags, her oversized purse swinging heavily against her hip. Her brand-new leather-soled shoes clicked sharply against the floor, a sound that mirrored her mood. Fast, impatient, unforgiving. She was late to meet her husband for dinner. Her stress boiled higher. When she reached the escalator, Linda barely hesitated. She was too distracted by the vibration of her phone in her hand, a text from her husband demanding to know when she'd arrive. The machine before her had been groaning for weeks, metal grinding against metal, its warnings ignored in the name of budget cuts. But Linda, so consumed by her frustration and need to move faster, didn't notice, or perhaps didn't care. She stepped onto the moving stairway, her new soles sleek against damp steel. Halfway up, momentum betrayed her. The freshly cleaned steps still glistened with moisture, slick and unforgiving. In an instant, her foot slipped, her body jerked backward, and the weight of her bags pulled her further off balance. Desperately, she clawed at the handrail, but gravity had already claimed her. Time seemed to slow as the inevitable happened. Her skull struck the sharp edge of a metal step with a sickening crack. The blow was catastrophic, silencing her instantly. Shoppers screamed. Bags tumbled down behind her. As if fate wasn't cruel enough, her long scarf twisted into the moving machinery, pulling tight around her neck as chaos erupted. Bystanders rushed forward, slamming at the emergency stop, but 30 seconds passed before the escalator ground to a halt. By then, Linda's body was motionless, her injuries irreversible. Blood pooled beneath her as stunned shoppers tried to comprehend what they had just seen. Paramedics arrived quickly, but there was nothing left to save. The cause of death was clear: massive trauma to the brain. The mall shut down all escalators immediately, officials scrambling to assure the public that safety standards had been met, though the machine's neglected groans told a different story. For those who watched, it didn't matter what the reports said. They had seen how quickly control could vanish, how one slip could end everything. Linda Morrison had spent her final moments fighting for power in a world she thought revolved around her. But in the end, it wasn't corporate policy or customer service that dictated her fate. It was a slick step, a forgotten maintenance request, and the cold, brutal laws of physics. Life, as everyone who witnessed it that night learned, doesn't care how entitled you are. It can take everything in a single heartbeat. It was June 3rd, 2013, morning at Eugene's downtown farmers market. Amid the cheerful chaos, there was one presence that drained the joy from the air: Patricia Chen. At 47 years old, Patricia had built a reputation as the farmers market's most dreaded visitor. She wasn't there for leisurely shopping or friendly conversation. She came armed with a laptop, a camera, and a relentless conviction that she was the only one standing between the public and fraudulent food vendors. Her blog had earned her a devoted online following. Thousands praised her as a watchdog, a fearless defender of food safety. But those who faced her in person told a different story. Vendors bristled when they saw her coming. They knew she would linger, interrogate, and drive customers away with her booming voice and sharp accusations. She treated every exchange like a courtroom drama, demanding answers, waving her phone like evidence, her tone dripping with superiority. That morning was no different. Patricia cornered a produce vendor, refusing to let him breathe. For 20 agonizing minutes, she grilled him about his organic certifications, demanding paperwork, threatening to report him to state authorities. Customers fidgeted in line, growing restless, but Patricia didn't care. She raised her voice higher, announcing to the entire market that this vendor was a fraud. When management tried to intervene, she brushed them off with a dismissive wave, too consumed with her mission to notice their frustration. At 10:30 a.m., Patricia slipped behind a delivery truck to photograph boxes of produce stacked in its bed. Her eyes never left her camera screen, fingers clicking frantically as if each photo would finally prove her righteousness. But in her determination to expose someone else, she forgot the most basic rule of survival: awareness. The driver climbed into the cab, unaware of Patricia crouched in his blind spot. The truck's backup alarm, meant to warn pedestrians, had malfunctioned days earlier. Even if it had been working, Patricia's attention was elsewhere, locked on her camera. Slowly, the truck began to reverse. The first impact was sudden and brutal. The steel bumper slammed into Patricia, knocking her off her feet. The force fractured her ribs before she even hit the ground. In the split second of confusion, she looked up, only to see the shadow of the rear wheel descending over her. The screams of nearby shoppers pierced the morning air. The truck jolted as it rolled over her lower torso, and the driver slammed on the brakes. Silence fell, broken only by Patricia's gasping breath. She was conscious, eyes wide with shock, but unable to move. Blood seeped onto the pavement beneath her. The vibrant market transformed into a scene of horror. Paramedics rushed to the scene within minutes, sirens wailing. They worked quickly, stabilizing her, fighting to stop the internal bleeding that was rapidly draining her life away. For a brief moment, hope flickered, but as they sped toward the hospital, Patricia's body gave out. The woman who had devoted her life to exposing others had met a violent end, her final investigation unfinished. It was September 12, 2014, in Charlotte, North Carolina, when Margaret Thompson's obsession with neighborhood perfection brought her face to face with something she could never control. For 55 years, she had lived with an ironclad belief that order, rules, and her interpretation of standards were the backbone of a respectable community. To her neighbors in Oakwood, she wasn't just another resident, she was the enforcer. The woman who measured grass with rulers, kept logs of garbage cans left out too long, and treated chalk art like vandalism. People avoided her, whispered about her, but no one dared to challenge her for long. That afternoon, Margaret was in rare form. She scolded children for drawing rainbows on their own driveway, calling it a blight. She berated the Johnsons because their garbage bins sat visible for 30 minutes too long. And when she reached Mrs. Garcia's rose bushes, roses that spilled just 2 inches beyond the property line, she let her voice ring across the cul-de-sac, warning that such negligence was dragging down everyone's property values. Her superiority was untouchable, or at least she believed it was. By evening, she was back on patrol, notebook in one hand, phone in the other, eyes scanning every lawn and fence for something to document. The wind had picked up, sharp gusts rattling trees and power lines. Up above, utility workers balanced on poles, repairing loosened cables that whipped restlessly in the breeze. Margaret didn't notice. Her focus was on what she thought was another violation, a messy yard she was determined to record. She stepped directly beneath a utility pole, angling her phone for the perfect shot, convinced she was once again protecting the neighborhood from careless residents. And then it happened. 30 feet above her, a lineman fought to steady a heavy clamp against the wind. A sudden violent gust tore it from his grip. He shouted down a warning, but by the time Margaret looked up, it was already too late. The 8-pound hunk of steel plummeted like a missile, striking her squarely on the skull. The impact was sickening. Neighbors who had endured years of her relentless policing now watched in horror as Margaret collapsed instantly, her notebook scattering to the pavement, her body motionless. Panic erupted. Residents rushed forward, some kneeling beside her, others dialing 911 with trembling hands. Utility workers scrambled down their poles, cursing the wind and their own equipment. Margaret was still breathing, shallow and ragged, but unresponsive. Paramedics arrived within minutes, sirens slicing through the night. They lifted her onto a stretcher, blood matting her hair, and sped her toward the hospital. Surgeons fought desperately to relieve the swelling in her brain. For 3 long hours, her family and neighbors waited, torn between grief and disbelief. But just before midnight, the fight was over. Margaret Thompson was gone. In the aftermath, the utility company tightened safety regulations, vowing that nothing like this would happen again. Workers would never again operate overhead without secured equipment and ground-level safety zones. The Neighborhood Association, for all its complicated history with Margaret, planted a memorial garden in her name, a symbol of both her devotion and her downfall.